Hidden behind the event plane, the story on the exodus of the Horde provides an allegorical take on the clash between tradition and the unknown, on the role that heroism plays in bridging the gap between the potentially rich, but vague, terrifying and even destructive Great Mother, and reassuring but possessive and even tyrannical Great Father. It is worth mentioning that, considering the quality of the video game, the effort invested and the thoroughness displayed under very limited conditions, we cannot overlook one fundamental fact. Each of the characters I plan to mention, although classified among the representatives or manifestations of one of the three aforementioned abstractions, the known, the unknown, and the intermediary process, is also an actor, that is, an individual with their own developmental path, motives, beliefs, weaknesses, and strengths. Therefore, reducing them to just one of the two roles, either allegorical or active, inevitably leads to incorrect conclusions. It should also be noted that the narrative part of Warcraft 3 begins with the orcs, even though it involves two short chapters meant to introduce us to the basic mechanics of the video game. Therefore, we learn almost nothing about the life of the Greenskins in Azeroth because the main content, which comes after the Undead campaign, relates to their toils in Kalimdor. However, it should be considered that the previous two parts of the Warcraft franchise covered the interactions between humans and orcs, so this decision by the creators of the third title is not without basis. All of this leads us to the conclusion that we must also rely on the literary treatment of the theme, which pertains both to the birth of the first Horde and the activities after passing through the Dark Portal and Thrall's rise from a slave to a leader. So, let us begin step by step. As with humans, the transformation of reality in the Orcish campaign is heralded by the appearance of the Prophet. However, before the first physical interaction with him, Thrall experiences a vision in his dream where a stranger addresses him directly. In our first video on Warcraft 3, we saw that the Prophet reveals himself to humans exclusively through physical manifestations, so it is worth noting the fact that things are different with Thrall. This suggests visionary abilities, the capacity for anticipation that actually makes him a leader and places him in the class of seers. The visionary ability, I believe, is a consequence of Thrall's developmental path. The unknown is not hinted at to him because of his position in the hierarchy, but he rather anticipates it and then understands it. We have plenty of symbolic confirmations of this, yet in order to piece them together we must return to the original homeland of the orcs. Their life on the planet Draenor is important for two reasons. The first concerns the transformation from a shamanistic tribal community to a more complex form of social organization. This is a complicated process tied to a wealth of sociological thought, but through literature and video games we are indirectly given a view of the two paths that opened up before the orcs. The first is led by Durotan, leader of the Frostwolf clan and Thrall's father, who in his youth expresses a tendency toward unification by questioning those aspects of tradition that prevent it, drawing closer to Orgrim Doomhammer. In the book by Christie Golden, titled Rise of the Horde, we even see him issuing a verbal challenge to Orgrim after the latter expresses doubts about the justifications for violating ancestral customs. The Frostwolf chieftain therefore believes in unifying the population based on mutual closeness, starting from micro level, that is, building a friendship with a representative of another clan, contrary to customs that dictate that interaction between members of different clans, except at the level of leaders, can only take place during the Great Kosh'harg festival. Their union represents a fellowship characterized by brotherhood, noble competition, recognition of the uniqueness of other communities, and a united effort in overcoming challenges. On the other hand, we have Orcish shamans, Ner'zhul and Gul'dan, with the former being a victim of the illusion created by demons, while the latter consciously participates in the transformation and enslavement of his own people for the sake of expanding his personal power. The two of them lead the unification of the tribes on a macro level, convincing clan leaders of the necessity of joint action against the Draenei. Therefore, they represent the creators of an amalgamation that does not strive for mutual understanding and broadening of horizons, but for integration in confrontation with the other, chosen to serve as the scapegoat on the altar of racial unity. Now, as shown in books and the movie, Gul'dan's approach prevails, leading to the gradual transformation of the shamanistic community into a group led by warlocks, perverted into a rampaging horde of bloodthirsty monsters tainted by fell magic and enslaved by the demonic forces of chaos and destruction. However, Durotan, along with his partner Draka and the rest of the clan, refuses to take part in this change, though they remain involved in some collective endeavors to avoid bringing the horde's wrath upon themselves. This brings us to the second important issue related to the green-skinned people's homeland, namely the issue of Thrall's birth. With the gradual spread of Fel, the environment begins to change, and once rich wilderness starts withering away, making way for wastelands, thirst and hunger. It is in such a world that the conception, which will result in the birth of Go'el or Thrall, occurs. This very wasteland serves as an argument in favor of passing through the dark portal into a new, fertile world. In the movie depiction of the story, Draka gives birth immediately upon arriving in Azeroth, and Gul'dan, who assists her in the process, seeing that the baby is stillborn and determined not to let the first orc born in the new world perish, sacrifices a nearby deer using Fel and breathes life into the future leader of the renewed horde. Thrall, therefore, is marked by the energies of chaos from the very beginning. However, the passage itself is filled with symbolism that deserves attention. In most depictions of the Dark Portal, besides the two figures carved into the pillars, we see either a dragon's head or a snake at its top. It is important to note that the appearance of the portal is not identical in every segment of Warcraft, so we see it without these ornaments in Prophet's Recollections, while in the missions on Draenor, as well as WoW's menu screen, we see it in the previously described form. Regardless, the presence of the snake or a dragon is of great significance here, as it represents one of the strongest archetypal symbols. When discussing the snake, we can reflect on the phenomenon of the numinous, that is, the simultaneous presence of unrest and awe, which elicit both fear and trembling as well as interest and attraction. This duality of character makes it both an agent of death and a confirmation of transformation and rebirth. Its venom is as terrifying and captivating as its ability to shed skin. Taking this as a starting point, we can describe its presence above the gate as follows. As medicine is contained within poison and poison within medicine, so too is order contained within chaos and chaos within order. This is the hallmark of the Dark Portal. On the other hand, we also have the figure of the dragon, which, with its majestic and terrifying appearance, overshadows the portal, symbolizing the precosmogonic dragon of chaos or eternity, known by the term Uroboros. In order to understand this symbolism, we can refer to Jordan Peterson, who states that the primordial therimorphic serpent god, often depicted as the Uroboros, represents endless potential and the union of opposites. This self-devouring snake or dragon symbolizes the fusion of contradictory elements, matter and spirit, known and unknown, order and chaos. As a snake, it is tied to the earth and matter, while as winged creature, it connects to the sky and spirit. This duality reflects the balance between masculine principles of order and feminine principles of creativity and chaos. Moreover, Uroboros embodies the concept of transformation, as it can shed its skin and be reborn, signifying the possibility of turning chaos into order and vice versa. It represents the undifferentiated potential that exists before active exploration and classification. As the source of all experience and knowledge, Uroboros is both the origin and the final destination of all things, uniting beginnings and endings in an eternal cycle. It symbolizes primal reality, the mystery from which all known and unknown aspects of existence emerge, and the continuous transformation of the predictable into the unknown. Turning back to the game, we can say that the portal was opened by sacrificing the Draenei, that is, through the destruction of life, but it created a bridge to a world that enabled the survival of life. By passing through it, the orcs enter an intermediate space, the primordial soup, and it is precisely there, floating in a vast and incomprehensible expanse of space-time between the old and new worlds, that Draka experiences contractions. The portal is a mystery that arises when the solution to the problem of the destruction of the old world creates a new problem of relentless conflicts and slavery in the new world. The primordial soup is an ocean of chaos that surrounds Draka as the island of Thrall's knowledge, though it is also her source, pushing her out on the other side. It is simultaneously the cosmic space that surrounds the planets Draenor and Azeroth, occasionally breaking through into them, sowing seeds of destruction and creation. From the human perspective, it transforms the temporarily predictable world of Azeroth into the unknown, introducing new forces that seek their place. However, alongside this force of destruction, it also creates a glimmer of hope, whose life is ensured by the sacrifice of others. The ambivalent nature of the portal therefore allows for the birth of positive potential, Thrall, from negative potential. This idea can be further supported by examining the meaning of Orcish names. Thus, at birth, Thrall receives the name Goel, which in English translates as to redeem. This phrase has multiple potential interpretations. If we look at what Oxford languages offer, his name can be reshaped as the Redeemer, but also the Deliverer or even the Covenant Keeper. Having lost his parents shortly after birth, Goel ends up as a slave and a gladiator. Through his own suffering, he symbolically atones for the sins of his people, later contributing through his actions to securing alliances among races, enabling the survival of life and halting the forces of destruction in whose name the orcs had previously destroyed it. Hence, the Redeemer. On the other hand, the name Thrall, as an Old English word for slave, speaks to his fate in the dungeons of Durnhold Keep. He undergoes a process of initiation, being exposed to a terrifying and violent experience, but emerging from it as a grown individual, a warrior equipped with the knowledge of the accumulated consequences of adaptive behavior. Thrall learns from humans who have been present in Azeroth for centuries, developing the necessary spectrum of skills and knowledge that lead to the deliverance of the orcs from the lethargy into which they fall. However, the seer goes a step further, so in later conflicts with Grom and then Manroth, he also leads the liberation from slavery under the demons, hence the Deliverer. In the end, Thrall unites the orcs and other races into a new horde and forms an alliance with the humans under Jaina's command. In the spirit of what was previously said about Durotan and Orgrim, and to the pride of his father, he shows that he sees beyond what has been and can grasp what is possible. Opposed to demonic unification through destruction and bloodthirstiness, which leads to Orcish exclusivity, by saving the Trolls and Tauren and later allying with Jaina, he leads to unity in common struggle and hope. This also covers the third, rarest interpretation of the mentioned phrase, which relates to the fulfillment of a promise or a covenant, hence the Covenant Keeper. Now, Thrall's character in the video game is shaped in contrast to Grom, who, not coincidentally, was the first to participate in Gul'dan's transformation ritual. His role in the orcs' deliverance is irreplaceable, just as his actions significantly contributed to their enslavement. Grom is the medium through which the influence of the Great Father, tradition, order, but also tyranny, is symbolically expressed in Kalimdor. The transformation into tyranny is driven by the desire to eliminate the threat of the unknown through a symbolic immersion in extremist traditionalism. However, the Deliverer brings the awakening, touched by the noble influence of the unknown, victoriously returning from the underworld with new allies. This unknown is foreshadowed by the Tauren through the cult of the Earth Mother and primarily manifested by the Night Elves. Let us reflect on this allegory. The nature of the relationship between Thrall and Grom is introduced in the prologue, titled Exodus of the Horde. Here we see both differences in their temperaments as well as their closeness, and even though they are not blood-related, this duo exemplifies brotherhood in every other way. Thrall, the leader of the Horde, is portrayed as a thoughtful and composed figure whose aspirations are directed towards the liberation of his people and breaking the cycle of senseless slaughter. Grommash Hellscream, however, embodies different traits. Proud, strong, and confident, this seasoned warrior shows a lack of patience and a pronounced hostility towards humans. As an older orc who witnessed the developments on Draenor, he represents the bearer of traditional orc thinking in the new world, eliminating potential threats before they have the chance to develop. Given this fact, Grom is inherently an enemy of the new and the unknown. This should not be understood in a simplistic good versus evil dichotomy. Hellscream is not a villain, but rather thinks and acts in a specific way, certainly with the goal of improving the Orcish situation, not enslaving them. Now, in the mythological depiction of reality, the eternally unknown, that is, nature, creative and destructive, the source and outcome of all transient phenomena, is generally ascribed an effectively ambivalent feminine character. On the other hand, the internally known, that is, culture, defined territory, tyrannical and protective, predictable, disciplined and restrictive, the accumulated results of heroic and exploratory behavior, is typically considered masculine. Finally, the eternal knower, the process that mediates between the known and the unknown, is depicted as a hero who replaces disorder and confusion with order and security. The main attribute of both the mother and the father, just like that of the serpent, is ambivalence. Thus, the mother represents the origin and conditions of life. She is a benevolent force that creates and provides a source of the new, but she is also a destructive power, a dark forest full of beasts, a storm that devastates and scares. It is therefore no coincidence that we primarily see the Night Elves as women, supreme and ruthless warriors who seek to destroy the orcs and their settlements, but also as protectors and restorers of the forest, which is essential to the orcs for organizing their communities and enabling life in the new world. On the other hand, the father represents protective culture, created and tested patterns that ensure our survival when we are too weak to create and test them ourselves. But he is also a totalitarian state which cruelly and unjustly rules its territory, suppressing and destroying any sign of disobedience and diversity. Again, it is not surprising that we see the orcs as a community of men, fearless and muscular warriors who take care of tradition, even if it involves cycles of destruction and conflict with humans. Grom is the primary embodiment of this. Thrall ultimately serves as a bridge between these two worlds. He is the savior hero, the god of thunder, and a visionary who descends into the underworld in search of prophecy. He embodies the process that transforms the chaos and confusion brought about by crossing the ocean, an archetypal representation of insecurity, uncertainty, and latent chaos, into order and safety, finding a land the orcs can call their own and erecting a monumental city to protect them in that land. He names the land Durotar and the city Orgrimmar in honor of the duo mentioned earlier, symbolism of which we'll cover later. However, in the interest of truth, it's worth adding a slight amendment here. So far, I have presented Thrall as the hero-savior, which he undoubtedly is. However, when viewed at a higher level of abstraction, this role represents just one aspect of the archetypal dual-natured son. Just as the mother and the father have different manifestations, the son can appear as a hero but also as his sworn enemy, arrogant and cunning. If we turn to the interpretation of Christian tradition, it would not surprise us that Jesus and Satan are seen as two manifestations of this archetype. Guided by this, we can say that such a division in Warcraft is manifested by Thrall and Gul'dan. Both are shamans, both leaders of the Horde, both mediators between the force of the unknown and the traditional structure of the community, yet one leads to downfall and the other to salvation. Now, the absence of the hero serves as a catalyst for the fall or the return of pre-cosmogonic chaos. Since the hero is the process that transforms chaos into order but also brings a breath of novelty into the rigidity of order, his removal from the equation necessarily leads to imbalance. This is exactly what happens in the New World twice, but with different consequences. In the first situation, the treacherous waters that separate the continents did their part, leaving the orcs scattered along the shores of Kalimdor. This turn of events leads to two separate experiences during the first encounter with the unknown world: exploratory and traditionalist, or Thralls and Groms, allowing us to glimpse the potential for further development of the orcish fate expressed through the personalities of these actors. In the second situation, the Farseer consciously sets out in search of the Oracle, leaving the management and construction of the base to Hellscream, which provides us with further elaboration of the consequences of the choices made in the first situation. We will address this case in a separate chapter and focus here on the first plot and its outcomes. The shipwreck survivors who ended up under Thrall's command after the disaster set out along the coast in search of surviving comrades, entering into interaction or conflict with the races they encountered in the expanses of unexplored land. During this process, they come into contact with the Tauren who were trying to defend themselves from the Centaur onslaught. Through the character of Cairn Bloodhoof and the Earth Mother cult, we get the first hint of the Great Mother. Of course, since we previously defined her as the unknown, the creative, and the destructive force, we can say that the entire new environment from the Orcs' perspective is her manifestation. However, this can also be said to some extent from the Tauren's perspective, where the Centaur, as a nomadic and destructive force, represent her negative aspect that's bent on their destruction, while the land and the Kodo beasts provide them with life. But our focus remains firmly on the Orcs. Thus, I believe that mentioning of the Earth Mother as well as Cairn's wise words inspired by his faith in her should be interpreted as part of Thrall's learning and realization. His growing awareness of the creative aspects of the New World, the nurturing force he encounters by interacting with the Tauren, helping them defend against attacks and finding a new home. In return, Cairn, as a mediator and a sage, reveals both the threat of the Centaur charge and the blessing of the Kodo's strength. He is the mechanism by which the process of direct interaction with the new is shaped into an abstract narrative, merging immediate and superficial personal experience with the indirect yet accumulated multi-generational experience of foreigners. By reflecting on the elements of reality in which the Orcs find themselves, the Tauren chieftain makes a distinction between the creative, life-giving aspects of the Great Mother and her destructive, murderous side. Along with this, Thrall gains information about the Oracle, learning through legends about its nature.
Legends say that it saw the strands of fate as they were woven by the Earth Mother.
These events in Kalimdor tell us that the positive aspect of the unknown is something that engages those who are willing. On the other hand, it later shows that encountering the Great Mother is unavoidable, and her negative face will inevitably reveal itself to the unwilling. It's just a matter of time before it happens. In any case, due to his unique life experience, Thrall combines the adaptive knowledge of humans, orcs, trolls, and Tauren, making him exceptionally equipped to deal with life's challenges while remaining open to new experiences. Grom's path, on the other hand, significantly diverges from this. We only learn about his actions in the New World when Goel, with parts of the Horde, stumbles upon the Warsong clan in a clear conflict with humans. After helping them, Thrall demands an explanation and learns that the remnants of the Alliance, led by Jaina Proudmoore, have arrived and set up camp at the mountain passes. Not knowing why the humans appeared in Kalimdor, Thrall orders that no conflict with them should occur until further notice and decides to use zeppelins to bypass the fortifications they have built. Grom reluctantly accepts this order, but only briefly. Soon after, he and the Warsong clan engage in battle with the enemy directly defying the warchief's command. Regardless of what led to this, we see that Grom embodies a continuation of the traditions brought from the old continent. Not only does he fail to seek out an understanding of the new environment, but he also shows no curiosity about the reasons for the humans' appearance in these unfamiliar lands. And although they provide a framework for initial organization in new circumstances, old patterns are insufficient for long-term survival. The mere fact that they had to leave their previous home and risk crossing the ocean testifies to the serious trouble that has arisen, making it necessary to reassess the traditional hierarchy of values. Therefore, the question that arises is quite simple. How can someone who finds themselves in unfamiliar circumstances, not knowing where they are going or, more precisely, where they need to go, know how to get there? Let us cite a passage from Peterson's book. Arrogant, prideful individuals presume they know who and what is important. This makes them too haughty to pay attention when they are in trouble, too haughty in particular to attend to those things or people whom they habitually hold in contempt. This is precisely the purpose of the image of the elder brother in myths and fairy tales, and it is exactly what Grom represents. The elder brother, guardian of tradition, embodiment of heroism from a bygone era, rejects change and displays arrogance, unaware of the dangers that surround it. Seeing Thrall's intention to bypass the humans, Grom gives voice to the spirits of the past.
A true warrior would simply take the pass from the humans.
Naturally, this comment, along with the actions taken, stirs Thrall's anger, but it is in this part of the game that the elder brother in Grom ignites, indirectly questioning Thrall's leadership and foreshadowing the evil that is approaching.
Don't lecture me, pup. The wretches deserved death. Don't you feel it, Thrall? It's like the old days, like the demons are near.
Unable to understand Grom's comments and attempting to avoid further conflicts due to his hot temper, Thrall orders the Warsong clan to head north through the forests and prepare a settlement. This interaction is of great importance to us for two reasons. First, it clearly shows that Hellscream is not a typical villain obsessed with his interests and a desire for power. He is a character burdened by the demons of the past, making serious efforts to deal with them, even apologizing to the Warchief. However, despite the effort, positive outcome is not guaranteed, and old habits die hard. On the other hand, it becomes evident that Thrall is not an omnipotent visionary. He cannot foresee what the consequences of their separation might be, and by making this decision, he sets the stage for the splitting of the Horde. This division creates space for the manifestation of the consequences of opposing approaches to the unknown, as well as the imbalance that arises from the voluntary departure of the hero savior. However, it is a necessary step towards establishing a new equilibrium. Yet the particular charm of the Orcish story in Kalimdor lies in the fact that the bearers of tradition, convinced of their absolute knowledge, do not have the privilege of waiting for the hero's return. Instead, their seemingly routine endeavor quickly turns into a struggle for survival. As we mentioned earlier, the Great Mother does not care whether you are willing or unwilling. Her destructive aspect will manifest sooner or later, and as we will see, in the absence of a mediating process, the aggression of the Great Mother awakens the aggression of the Great Father, and vice versa. One more argument we can provide for what was previously mentioned is tied to the translation of Orcish names. In order to be understood, fairy tales and myths use concrete beings and phenomena to depict abstractions. In that regard, one of the beings usually given as a manifestation of the Great Father is the ogre. It is not surprising then that Gromash in Orcish language means ogre's heart. But let us turn to more obvious evidence. If we consider the basic elements of the Great Father, that is tradition, order and tyranny, we can conclude that Grom encompasses all three within the limited time he is given in the game. As for tradition, this was already commented on in the previous chapter. Hellscream re-establishes the logic of life from Azeroth in the New World. We see that he is in conflict with humans, that he reproaches Thrall for avoiding combat, that he questions the hierarchy gradually forming, and that he is tormented by the demons of the past, that is, the negative, heavy burden of historical legacy. The simultaneous existence and actions of Grom and Thrall actually tell us that the new Horde has not yet truly been created, meaning there is no clear, perfectly unifying culture, but rather two forces pulling in opposite directions, though they certainly intersect in a series of things. Hellscream is also a representative or manifestation of order, which is best seen during the collection of materials on the outskirts of Ashenvale Forest. Frustrated by the role he has been given, confident in the fighting superiority of the Warsong, he arrogantly claims that Thrall will not get far without him. However, Ashenvale is no ordinary forest, and its unusual tranquility awakens suspicion and unease among the warriors, who get the impression that something is watching them from the shadows. That elusive gaze from the shadows implies the full potential of the unknown before it is realized, and thus falls within the domain of pre-cosmogonic chaos. But in the face of such a threat, Grom stands firm, responding with criticism and mockery.
Are you all afraid of spirits now? There is nothing here but ancient trees and shadow.
However, at that very moment we hear a self-assured, threatening female voice and laughter without a clear source and in an unknown language. Panic arises in the camp, work is halted and fear increasingly colors the voices of the warriors. Grom, however, remains unwavering.
Still your tongue and get to work. The war chief's new settlement will require a great deal of lumber. This section of forest must be cleared.
To clarify, The Great Father is the order that stands against chaos, the civilization built against nature, but with its help. He is a benevolent force that protects individuals from catastrophic encounters with what they do not yet understand. With the voice coming from the depths of the forest, we have confirmation of a literal misunderstanding of the phenomenon the orcs are encountering for the first time. However, through steel discipline, Grom prevents chaos and catastrophe, as death soon appears in the form of warrior women. The orcs maintain formation and manage to defend themselves. Success, on the other hand, enables the continuation of work, and thus civilization is created against nature, the dark forest full of dangers, but inevitably with the resources it extracts from it. Interestingly, the orcs are shocked by the fact that they are facing women, but Grom's voice shows no trace of confusion or surprise. On the contrary, he positively comments on their combat prowess. He sees the similarity with elves of the old continent, drawing a parallel with previous experiences with a clear reference to the difference in height and savagery. The continued penetration into the depths of the forest results in an encounter with the Tree of Life, another phenomenon that causes some warriors to pause and suggest keeping a distance. Such caution, fear, or superstition once again awakens Hellscream's anger.
Am I surrounded only by cowards? It's a tree, like any other. Cut it down!
However, it turns out that the felled native of the forest is anything but an ordinary tree, just as the elven force he collided with is far from the notions Grom possessed. It is in fact life that sprouted from the seed of the world tree, known as Nordrasil, and is an obvious allusion to an archetypal symbol present in various cultures, and certainly connected by name to Norse mythology. Viewed in a broader context, the desecration of the Tree of Life is merely an overture to the burning legions attacked on the World Tree and foreshadows the destructive trajectory that Grom, along with his clan, has embarked upon. The potential destruction of Nordrasil would erase the world's axis, returning all existence to the domain of the pre-cosmogonic Dragon of Chaos. Be that as it may, what these scenes show us is the fact that, as the embodiment of the Great Father, Grom protects the community from the unknown. However, the world he has found himself in is not the one he came from. Thus, the attempt to reduce the incomprehensible depth of the unknown to the shallow categories of the known leads to the emergence of a challenge in the form of the forest demigod scenarios. The sudden manifestation of the destructive aspect of the Great Mother shatters a large portion of the Orcish settlement and forces the main body of troops to retreat. But escape is not possible, and the newly created situation brings the war song to the brink of destruction. And it is precisely from this seed that the tyrannical aspect of the Great Father emerges. However, before we turn to that, it would be worth saying a few things about the Great Mother. The unknown in mythology is usually presented by nature: depths, the matriarch, the maw of the earth, a dragon, a cave, the moon, deep water, and dark woods. Elves are distinctly connected to nature and the forest. Leading them as a matriarch is Tyrande Whisperwind, a priestess serving Elune, the goddess of the moon and life, who is considered the mother of the semi-divine being that attacks the orcs. They refer to themselves as the Night Elves, reflecting their affinity for the moon and darkness. Although the elven society and the narrative surrounding their development far exceeds what is mentioned here, most of these details form the basic information present in this campaign, and the orcs in Ashen Vale are certainly not in a better situation than we are. However, in choosing materials for referencing, one segment of the story is particularly interesting and further supports the points made. To properly understand it, however, it is necessary to consider the relationship between the Ouroboros and the Great Mother. It is said that the Ouroboros is the source of everything, but while the separation of the Great Father from the place of origin is clear to us, this distinction might not be so obvious in the case of the Great Mother. This is because these figures often overlap, but the distinction lies in the fact that Ouroboros is the potential of the unknown as a thing itself, while the Great Mother is the realization of the unknown, or the unknown that a specific subject encounters in a specific situation. Previously given list of the manifestations of the Great Mother includes, among others, a dragon, while on the other hand we have mentioned that the dragon above the Dark Portal depicts Ouroboros. This is a concrete example of the difference between the manifestation of the unknown, the dragon as a subject or active force, and the potential of the unknown, the dragon as a statue that is an idea or symbol. Although in the Night Elves campaign we learn that the Burning Legion is not unknown to the representatives of this race, that they had already fought them and emerged victorious, it is only in the expansion called the Frozen Throne that we get a deeper view of the events from ancient times. We gain insights into the epic clash that resulted in the destruction of the old world and the flood caused by uncontrolled magical energies and the great sundering that occurred at the Well of Eternity. The deluge, which submerged 80% of the old landmass, split the world into two continents, Kalimdor and Azeroth as we know them in Warcraft 3, and in the process engulfed elfish cities. The dramatic energies of the Well, which were responsible for the evolution of the elves, paved the way for the flood, restoring the domain of the Ouroboros and destroying the once magnificent Elven Empire, over whose center, even during the events we describe, a great whirlpool rages. Although some of the elves remained in Kalimdor, others ended up in the deep waters of the ocean. However, this was not the end for them. The Great Mother, the realization of the unknown created through emancipation from the primordial soup of chaos, merges again with Ouroboros, the potential of the unknown, and the elves in the depths of the sea are transformed into Naga, serpent-like creatures, returning things to the starting point. This is exactly what we find in Peterson's work, where he states that the Great Mother should be regarded as a primary agent of the Serpent of Chaos, which can be seen lurking behind her, while she often adopts reptilian or bird-like features. Now, as we mentioned previously, in the absence of the process that mediates between the known and the unknown, the destructive aspects of these two elements of experience enter a vicious cycle of mutual reinforcement. The gaze hidden by the veil of moonlight awakens fear in the orcs. The manifestation of order strives towards reducing nature to resources. The destruction of the forest induces an attack by warrior women. Civilization expands its own boundaries, entering more aggressively and deeply into the domain of the unknown. The dark abyss releases forces that bring civilization to the brink of collapse. The fear of death results in totalitarian conformity and absolute hostility towards the others. The Juggernaut is unleashed, and thus we come to the last attribute of the Great Father, tyranny. So, due to Cenarius' attack, the organization of the Warsong clan teeters on the brink of collapse. Many lumber camps disappear under the assault of the elves, and Grom draws a line of defense along the banks of a nearby river. The front stabilizes temporarily because Cenarius stops in the depths on the other side, restoring the devastated lands. However, the current equilibrium is not sustainable in the long term, as the orcs have no chance in a war of attrition, nor if the demigod decides to personally attack the last stronghold. The fear of destruction and death is omnipresent. Ready to do anything to protect the Warsong and confident in his own strength, Grom drinks the corrupt waters of the nearby pool into which Manroth had previously spilled his blood, thus closing the circle of symbolic unity with the tainted tradition that Gul'dan helped create. Hellscream is uninterested in the origins of the energies that the pool abounds in. He doesn't care whom the satyrs guarding it serve. He disregards the warnings of the trolls and dismisses the protests of some warriors who remind him of trolls' teachings. He remains firm in his belief that nothing can stop him from protecting his own. That belief entails the idea of skipping the developmental, that is, cognitive process, and destroying the unknown, and in that regard he remains consistent with both the original Horde and the symbol of the maddened Great Father. Water grants the orcs supernatural abilities and allows them to strike with full force against Cenarius and the elves. The enraged warriors destroy everything in their path, and Grom entirely overlooks the fact that Cenarius knows who they are and where they come from, even though he clearly rejects the idea that they serve the demonic forces. The demigod's insistence that there is no difference between demons and orcs and that the idea of orcish freedom is ridiculous only further fuels Grom's rage. In the absence of the hero savior, the Great Father remains blind to the truth that by his own exclusivity he is suffocating his children. And just as the unknown, along with the threat it represents, is removed, a Hydra, Manroth, appears before Grom. Only then does he realize that the unknown was a barrier to the demonic forces. Only then does he realize that he is enslaved by destructive urges. However, this realization comes too late, at the moment when Hydra, the dragon of the underworld, symbolically devours him. This is witnessed by Manaroth's voice, which gleefully reminds him,
Stupid, pitiful creature. I am the rage in your heart. I am the fury of your thoughts. I alone empowered you to bring chaos to this world, and by the endless void you shall.
We should note here that the very existence of the Great Father implies the loss of absolute freedom, which cannot survive in the world of those who strive for security. Thus, every state necessarily limits freedom, but further efforts to expand safety do not mean that it will be achieved. Rather, that the space of freedom will be replaced by greater authoritarianism, often less capable of dealing with challenges. Striving to put an end to the threat of the unknown by drinking the black waters of chaos, Grom becomes a bloodthirsty beast, transforming the adaptive structure of the past, the accumulated knowledge of generations long gone, into a tyrannical yoke which reduces the diversity of reality to uniformity, killing every hint of freedom. Therefore, it stings hard when his active dimension, as opposed to the allegorical one, whimpers before the demon, "We are free." For once again, we realize that he is not a malevolent agent. The next time we encounter him in an allegorical form, Grom is no longer on the front lines with his warriors or workers. Surrounded by demonic guards, the Great Father sits on a throne high above the other representatives of the Warsong clan. There are no more thralls or other races in his ranks. His soldiers now charge even against their own kind. The tyrant rules with an iron fist over a scorched earth under a rain of comets of chaos, serving the demons of the past and removing everything in his way. The fear of death is transformed through manic struggle into hatred of everything different and finally of life itself. In the belly of the beast, enslavement under Manaroth, the orcs become what they were fleeing from. Death, destroyers of life, part of the mindless mass of the Burning Legion. Hatred becomes the essence of their personality. Yet, the hero savior would not be what he is if he did not believe in the salvation and redemption. With this, we finally come to the hero savior or the seeker of knowledge. Mythological representations of this actor include the eye, self, phallus, plow, consciousness, enlightened one, a trickster or a fool, a hero or a coward, a spirit as opposed to the matter as opposed to dogma, the sun. In Warcraft 3, the heroic aspect of the dual-natured sun covers the role of the far-seeing one. His magic involves revealing unknown parts of terrain, becoming acquainted with what lies ahead. Therefore, he represents both the eye and the light. He is the first orc of the New World to whom the spirits of nature reveal themselves, making him the ultimate shaman, bearer of the powers of earth, air, fire, water, and the wild. Hence, he is a representative of the ethereal, spirit as opposed to matter, but also as opposed to the demonic dogma of the warlocks. Thrall as a shaman carries the spiritual aspects, while as a war chief he manifests heroism. From the orcish perspective, he is clearly a member of their race, the known, but raised within human culture, the unknown. He is the son of Durotan, chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, and Draka, a warrior woman whose name irresistibly evokes the Latin term for serpent or dragon, Draco. Thus, he embodies the Great Father and the Great Mother. However, of all the mentioned representations, one phenomenon remains particularly interesting. I am convinced that it is crucial to emphasize consciousness or enlightenment both in regards to the content of the game and because the role it plays in cosmogonic narratives. Although birth is often treated as the starting point of creation in interpretations of myths, Northrop Frye, in his interpretation of the biblical story, offers a different perspective. He argues that the concept of beginning is metaphorically tied to the moment of waking from sleep, symbolizing a transition from one world to another. This awakening, which leads to a greater sense of reality, echoes the creation narrative in Genesis, where the world emerges through speech and consciousness. It is seen as a passing from a world where everyone has his own logos into a world where there is a common logos. The narrative part of Warcraft 3 begins with the prologue Exodus of the Horde. The short film that opens it provides us with the metaphor of creation. The cryptic messages addressed to Durotan's son, conveyed by the prophet's voice, are accompanied by a slow panorama of a rugged yet beautiful land under a red sky. Pollen drifts through the air as a raven, Death, prophet, psychopomp, a mediator between the material and spiritual world, and the mythical ancestor of souls, gazes wearily and suspiciously, foreshadowing unrest. Soon we witness the charge of two armies, orcish and human, but among the mass of warriors one pauses, looking around and directing his gaze to the sky. The scene is framed in such a way that, due to Sun's position relative to the orcish army, it gives the impression that this figure emerges from the light. That figure is Thrall, who perceives that the heavens are splitting and that a reign of chaos is coming. Soon the raven, now in the form of the prophet, speaks directly into the camera and calls on the viewer to gather the people and lead them across the ocean. This call awakens Thrall, distressed and sweaty, and the film gradually fades. Warcraft 3 actually begins with the awakening of the hero savior. Individual awakening in the world of personal logos, where amidst the senseless charge of the masses, the self, or I, stands apart, gets transformed into the first step towards the collective awakening in reality. The old world of endless conflict, whose outcome can only be destruction, is replaced by a new one. The archetypal potential of tradition enters the process of reconfiguration with the symbolic birth of the actor, or consciousness, or light in a figurative sense. From this we understand that the dream is tradition or heritage, the old world. But since the dream is also Thrall's vision, it represents his awakening to the consequences that unaltered heritage can bring. And if we add all this to the earlier argument in favor of the idea that Gul'dan is the destructive aspect of the bivalent sun, we will not be surprised that one of the names he gives himself is the Destroyer of Dreams. For while Thrall leads to awakening through the transcendence of the inherited, Gul'dan, by destroying it, leads to darkness, that is, the absence of all consciousness, even if it is a hazy reflection of accumulated past deeds. The opening scene of the Exodus of the Horde depicts the process of the awakening of consciousness as the cause for unrest, a theme present in mythological narratives across various cultures. The raven's unease elevates the dream of a bird into the vision of the prophet. The warning from this mysterious figure leads to Thrall's awakening and unrest. His enlightenment and the subsequent movement of the Horde towards Kalimdor brings about unrest among the orcs, especially within Grom. All of this ultimately leads to tensions during the dangerous journey and a split when the warchief voluntarily embarks on a quest for answers. This division, however, is necessary due to the fact that only a qualitative transformation of both individual and collective worldviews can resolve the spreading unrest. To achieve this, the positive aspect of the Great Mother must be integrated into the rigid structures of the Great Father. The hero thus participates in this process but cannot accomplish it alone. After the second split, Goel sets out for the Stone Talon Peak in search of the Oracle. As he ascends the peak, he encounters humans, but remains puzzled by their intentions, particularly the fact that they do not attack the orcs. He is assisted by Cairn, who introduces him to the existence of wyverns and suggests they be persuaded to join their cause, a task that involves battling the harpies who have enslaved them. After incorporating this force of nature into his ranks, the warchief reaches the peak only to find Jaina entering the cave he is also heading towards. This is particularly interesting since a cave is primarily associated with the base, not the heights. However, the combination of these elements might symbolize the unification of the Great Father, the height, and the Great Mother, the depth, where Thrall, after overcoming the ascent and the battle with the humans, that is, the legacy of the past, enters the jaws of the unknown in an attempt to understand his destiny. The descent into the underworld is a widely recognized archetype. The hero dives into terrifying yet creative depths, exposing himself to danger, but aware that only in the environment of peril can he find the treasure. The cave is associated with the feminine aspect due to its connection to the earth and fertility, but also to its resemblance to the female genitalia. Warcraft 3 aptly portrays the underworld as a combination of a cave, the hell, a prison, and the remnants of the elven architecture. Thus, it is also a reflection of the Earth Mother, as described by Cairn, the home of her combative incarnation, the antechamber of the Chaos Dragon, and a symbol of Thrall's beginning. the dungeon in which he was confined during his gladiatorial days. In any case, the war chief arrives at the oracle only to encounter Jaina. At this point, things get complicated. It is difficult to determine the creator's intentions, but the way they develop this part of the campaign leaves a significant plot hole concerning the unexplained relationship between the prophet, who has appeared to both Thrall and Jaina from the beginning of the Warcraft saga, and the oracle that Cairn speaks of. The presence of elven architecture and the petrified Princess Ajun suggests a long history of that area, raising questions about whether there existed an oracle known to the races of Kalimdor, or if it had always been the prophet. This confusion is further exacerbated by Thrall's reaction to the prophet's appearance.
You're no oracle. You're the prophet.
The difference between these two is not insignificant. The oracle is what it is. It doesn't go anywhere or convince anyone. People come to it. On the other hand, this is not the case with the prophet. He is active, conveying messages, persuading and motivating others to take action. However, experience with the array of characters shows that his words mostly fall on deaf ears. Even in the case of Jaina and Thrall, skepticism remains, as does an initial readiness for conflict despite the circumstances and the prophet's warnings. And I believe that here lies the key to understanding the relationship between the two. To clarify this, we must turn to Peterson and first ask the following question. Could a collaboration between humans and orcs have been possible in Azeroth? We mentioned in the first video tied to Arthas' story that, to the extent that Uther and he represent Lordaeron, the fact that Jaina only comes into contact with Thrall after crossing the ocean suggests that an alliance wouldn't have been formed even if Uther had taken up the fight instead of Arthas. However, this was in relation to Lordaeron as a form of human organization into a state entity, not Azeroth as a continent. But for the argument I want to build, Azeroth itself is not important. Rather, it's Jaina and Thrall within it. The individuals we meet in the old world are not the same as the actors who meet at the Oracle. The journey has transformed them. Jaina embarks on this voyage after witnessing the catastrophe of Arthas' fall, while Thrall and the Horde without lands or cities to call home set off before such a development. Yet neither of them knows the prophet's intentions, nor do they expect him to persuade them into cooperating with the other side. Turning back to Peterson's work, we see that experiences considered taboo by the current moral standards might hold the potential for creative solutions to unresolved or future problems. He suggests that these forbidden experiences could offer untapped possibilities for redemption. Narratives featuring a traveling sage, a wandering magician, or a courageous adventurer highlight the value of such experiences. Pilgrimage rituals, where one leaves the safety of familiar culture to embark on a challenging journey to unknown holy places, symbolically represent this process of personal growth, integration, and maturity. Such quests may fulfill their purpose even if the ultimate goal, like the Holy Grail, remains unattainable. Seen from this perspective, the Prophet knows that persuading them to undertake joint action from the outset would be futile. It is only through the transformative pilgrimage that the potential for cooperation arises, through a radical transformation of perception. Although we don't know how Jaina decided to head toward the Oracle, we see that Thrall believes it is there that he will learn about the fate of his people. That outcome remains the final, impossible purpose, but the journey through Kalimdor and the unknown but sacred depths of the cave where the Oracle is supposedly located leads to the catalyzation of the psychic process of expansion, integration, and maturation. Therefore, it remains irrelevant what the Oracle is or where Cairn's story about its origin and location came from. What matters is that for the local species, the Tauren, it is a sacred land, that the orcs are heading toward it, that the Prophet reveals his intention to lead them together. What matters is that humans and orcs manage to restrain themselves from conflict and emerge from the cave as allies. At this point, the entire relationship shifts dramatically. In Thrall's case, the old schema is dismantled, allowing for a reconfiguration and strengthening through a qualitative transition from the behavioral model of the old Horde to the behavioral model of the new Horde. The forces under his command are stronger and more numerous than before, and they have the support of the remnants of the Alliance. On the other hand, when it comes to the units under Grom's control, dismantling arises by sheer chance. The appearance of the unknown after persistent dismissal of danger leads to the rapid disintegration of the community and the establishment of a new, subordinate relationship with demons. The crisis reaches its peak and now orcs stand against each other. Thrall's first transgression against the war song, sending them to do physical labor, is compounded by the unforgivable alliance with humans. Not only do they see him as a bad leader because of what is perceived as wrong decisions, but he now also becomes a traitor. Therefore, in one of the interactions between the conflicting sides, the demon-tainted orcs first hurl insults.
You are the humans' lapdog. We serve only the Legion now.
And then blows. The schism manifests. But as I said, a hero wouldn't be a hero if he didn't try to save his teacher and brother from the demonic embrace, and in this endeavor, Jaina is irreplaceable. The main characteristic of the hero lies in the fact that he is neither an enemy nor a slave to the culture. Precisely because of this, Thrall strives equally to avoid the anarchy of civil war and the tyranny of demonic rule. However, to succeed in this, he needs the essence of the Great Father. He needs legitimacy and the salvation of positive heritage. Therefore, after breaking through the demon hordes and the inevitable clash with the extremist orcs, he finds himself face to face with Grom, and at that point learns that the curse on Draenor did not come out of nowhere but was the result of a conscious choice. Yet Thrall does not kill Hellscream, but rather captures his soul using a gem he receives from Jaina. In this way, he manages to bring him back to the base without harming him. In the end, through the combined efforts of Thrall's shamans and Jaina's wizards, Grom comes to his senses. Just as Gul'dan exploited one aspect of tradition to plunge the entire community into the embrace of demons, Thrall now rescues that same aspect from extremism, intending to free the rest of the Warsong clan from Manaroth's control. That's why he decides to strike at the heart of the problem, to slay the Hydra, and he embarks on this mission together with Grom. This testifies to the idea of rescuing what is positive in the Orcish heritage, saving heroism, honor, strength, and warrior skills, but it equally testifies to Grom's awakening as an individual. From the closing cinematic, we see that Thrall does not manage to inflict serious damage on Manaroth and is easily overpowered. It will be Grom, the manifestation of this heroic tradition, refined by Goel's leadership and the hope he gives, who will defeat the demon but also perish in the process. This way, Grom dies as an actor, while in a metaphorical sense the dual leadership disappears and the long process of cultural reconfiguration is concluded. The transformation of individual consciousness results in the transformation of the collective. The fire vanishes from the eyes of orcs tainted by Fel. Peace is established in the soul of every individual, and the joint struggle with other races results in the victory over the Burning Legion. The passing of the old and the birth of the new brings peace in the form of a new home on a part of Kalimdor's land that resembles Draenor, but also the vastness from Thrall's dreams. The mythical paradise is regained. In this situation, the war chief decides to name the first city Orgrimmar and the land Durotar, in honor of the heroes of old. On one hand, this decision testifies to the idea of continuity. The community is not created from scratch, but rests on the accumulated wisdom of the dead, enriched by the exploratory creative potential of the living. However, this does not answer the question of why Orgrim is associated with city and Durotan with the land. My belief is that the city symbolizes the realization of the known. Its walls are literal protection from the foreign, its streets the bloodstream of the community. This is understandable given that Orgrim was the war chief of the old horde who preserved them in the new world and stopped the machinations of the warlocks. He is the manifestation of the heroism of yesteryear as well as order and organization. However, this is not enough. Thrall met Orgrim, learned about his origins from him, but in the process also received advice to leave Grom. The old leader saw only a destructive force tainted by demonic energies in Hellscream. In doing so, he deprived himself of an ally which, no matter how potentially destructive, still contained a positive aspect and had to play a role in the liberation. Moreover, such a decision partially symbolizes a return to the principle of intertribal distance that Durotan sought to overcome. Thrall knows that salvation and deliverance are impossible unless they are universal. Therefore, he cannot accept the rift between these two and strives to achieve complete unification. It is precisely in this that I recognize the symbolism of the decision to name the territory Durotar. For it too, as an explored space, is an aspect of the known, but not its realization like the city, rather its potential. Therefore, with this decision, Thrall testifies to his belief that the heroic deeds of previous times can only have meaning as long as they are framed by the great ideas of exploration, questioning, and unification, which are a part of Orcish heritage, although previously suppressed by the actions of destructive forces. Their potential is equal to the potential of the known expanse. Only such a city in such a land offers hope because it represents the protective framework of tradition within the heroic transformative process that mediates between the capital and the unknown realms beyond the borders of Durotar. In this way, Thrall also identifies with the aforementioned duo, or rather the heritage, as does every orc who is a part of this community. Thus, from a hero and a leader in the making, we get the Wise King, the bearer of legitimate power, who resides within the concentric circles of positive heritage. From the slave, we get the Redeemer, the Deliverer, and the Covenant Keeper. Thank you for watching.